Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to jump into this training. This is Doug Chamblin with the Office of Environmental Services. Today's training is Understanding Baseline Schedules. Apologize here. The slide is not advancing. Hang on. Well, it looks like we have some technical difficulties to start off. Apology again. Slides are not advancing. Thank you. All right. Again, I'm Doug Chamblin, Environmental Program Manager in the Office of Environmental Services. I'm going to give a brief welcome today, and then we're going to launch right in to some presentations. Housekeeping, a little housekeeping for this, or rules of engagement for today's training. If you join anonymously, you will not show up on the engagement report if you want credit for taking this training. And enter any questions you have in the Q&A box. This is a Microsoft Live event, so all microphones are muted except the presenter. So there are two boxes you'll see. There is a comment box as well as a Q&A box. If you have a question you would like to be answered, be sure you enter it in the Q&A box, not in the comment box. So it'll include your name if you've entered it, or it'll say anonymous if you did not log in with a name. Your questions will be fielded several times throughout the afternoon. Type them in as you go. So there is a slight delay in them showing up. So don't wait until we get to the Q&A session to enter them. Enter them as they come up. This session is being recorded for anyone who misses it. And there's a 15-minute break about halfway through. Participating offices. So when we launched this idea of having this scheduled training, many offices throughout GDOT expressed interest. Making a schedule is not one office's job. Each of these offices and more contribute and have a role to play in interdependent steps. So you'll hear today from performance-based management and research, Office of Program Control, Office of Program Delivery, Roadway Design, Bridge Design, Office of Environmental Services, Utilities, Right-of-Way, and Engineering Services. And you see there's two breaks for questions, or two points where we'll stop and answer questions. I'm sorry, 3 points where we'll stop and answer questions, and a 15-minute break in the middle. So project delivery involves a lot of team members. Many people touch each project as it goes through the PDP. A minor project can involve 10 SMEs, but some of our major projects the last several years, over the course of the project, will be 50 or more SMEs. And again, the team requires a lot of coordination. There's activities that are dependent on other activities to begin. Some can occur concurrently, but throughout the plan development process, team members must maintain coordination, and especially where there are handoffs to another team member or someone's waiting for a plan set or some other deliverable before they can get started. So we're going to really delve into this theme in the next few hours with hearing from experts from those offices on what they look for and what they need to get their piece of this puzzle delivered. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kay Abacoy in the Office of Performance Management.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kay Abacoy, and I'm the Performance Management Program Manager in the Office of Performance-Based Management and Research. In today's session, we will have an opportunity to understand the role of OPMR when it comes to baseline performance measures of the office we are going to hear from today. We are just going to also take a much closer look at the structure of OPMR, as well as really dissect what a performance metric really entails, in addition to the importance of why we have performance measures within the department. We're going to transition into a high-level discussion of the baseline performance measures that are measured by the department, as well as how they really align with the plan development process. And a few other agenda items just includes the strategies to maintain schedules, as well as some of the predecessors as well as successors to milestones in the plan development process of the P6 schedule. To start, we will introduce the Office of Performance-Based Management and Research and the structures as well as the functions of my office. OPMR is split into 4 different programs, but just today we are focusing on the Performance Management Program Unit. We also have a huge role in managing the department's asset management or the state's asset management, in addition to organizing the strategic plan, as well as research and development, the research program unit of the department. But we are focusing on performance management, as I mentioned. The core, just the overall core functions of the performance management program unit is to oversee over 300 plus performance measures owned by GDOT offices. We all work together to analyze data on a quarterly basis. We identify leading indicators, lagging indicators, monitor progress of data, as well as assist in setting targets for the office. And we also facilitate quarterly performance reviews. Performance measures as well as targets really provide a means to prioritize investment options, as well as to evaluate some of the outcomes that are associated with just overall implementation. Some of these options really assist the offices in making adjustments, as well as allowing us to really just to allow us to make informed decisions. Target setting is just informed by data in addition to analysis, and that just supports the overall goal of providing a means to evaluate progress during a specific period of time. So at this time, I would like everyone to just take a brief moment and just think about, what does your office measure? Is that really based on goals provided by your manager, provided by your office? So I just want to pose that as a question for you to think about. Goals and targets may come from the needs of the public or your own specific strategic plan developed by your office or by your company, by your firm. It can come from many different areas. OPMR works with GDOT offices to identify metrics or key performance indicators that really provide more insight into factors that can do things such as improve processes, decrease costs, as well as evaluate durations, identify trends, setting teams for our targets to meet and exceed, and in this case, really just evaluate timeliness and maintain timeliness. And our office really assists all offices at GDOT to basically look at those trends and just to maintain certain targets that are fairly well for the just for the nature of our goals, as well as the overall vision of GDOT. We host quarterly performance management reviews, and which we internally call PMRs. And this just serves to showcase every office's current and past performance. So here we're really advertising the bridge maintenance office here. During these meetings, we highlight the metric importance, which you can see on the left-hand side, the metric description, as well as calculation. We just really want the offices to identify metrics that are meaningful, as well as tell the true story of the issues or successes that they may be experiencing this quarter or over the trend of a certain period of time. Targets, of course, may be variable for a specific amount of time, and of course, they may adjust depending on the data as well as the needs of a specific item or task. So in this case, we are looking at percent of bridge maintenance plans delivered per the baseline schedule, and that target is set at 90% per quarter. And approximately 15% of GDOT metrics, they are aligned to the baseline schedule, 15% of 300, and they span the entire PDP process, which is plan development process. From when just a schedule is put onto a project all the way through when it has let. We even have measures that span construction authorization, as well as whether a project is constructed on time for the public. Most of the targets for these measures are equal to, or they are fairly above just the actual percentage of 85. And as we can see here, here are some of the measures in addition to where we have baseline measures for project initialization in terms of schedule programming, as well as how early do we assign project managers to a specific project. We'll learn more about all of these measures from the offices today, but I just wanted to give you a high-level overview of basically what type of measures we have in addition to how they align with the PDP. We have measures in the overall concept phase, just in terms of approving the actual concept report, as well as the timeline associated with that, whether it's per baseline, preliminary design, that's in terms of whether we actually approve studies per the baseline, in addition to completing plans, as well as right-of-way authorization, the approval of plans, in addition to document approval, if there is a document, as well as right-of-way certifications, in addition to many other tasks associated with right-of-way, as well as final design, preparation of final plans and submittals, as well as letting. So we'll take a deeper dive into what these measures actually look like. This may be a little bit difficult to see, like as we just proceed on, but you can use Control on your keyboard as well as scroll with your mouse if it's just allows you to zoom in. So here are some of program deliveries metrics as well as design policy and support. And these are measures within the overall concept phase. And this just includes basically just assigning project managers specific projects that have been approved. as well as just submitting concept reports to by project managers and just approve concept reports by design policy and support. And then in the preliminary design phase is where we have most of our baseline measures. We have measures from materials and testing, as well as program delivery again. We have measures from environmental. Most of the measures here for environmental, they are within this office. We also have measures from the Office of Right-of-Way for right-of-way plan, or excuse me, just the actual projects authorized for right-of-way. In addition to utilities, as well as the Office of Right-of-Way and roadway design and bridge design. And in final design, again, we have materials and testing, as well as program control and roadway design and environmental and certification. So some of the overall potential schedule risks that we can see throughout like any type of project, so which we'll talk about just today, just includes project design changes. This can definitely put us like project schedule at risk, as well as public controversy, funding delays. But I think the overall message that we're going to just convey today is that just like communication through a project team as well as project manager is definitely very critical to maintaining the schedule, as well as trying to set tasks towards recovery, as well as so what are the many ways we can do that. But definitely creating a better understanding of what the overall metrics are for each office, as well as understanding what we all measure. Some of the initiatives that we have in place is a baseline schedule working group, and this is a huge, just like collaborative effort through all of the offices within the Division of Engineering, as well as other offices as well, to just really initiate some of the key factors that are keeping us behind baseline, as well as develop some improvement processes that just will allow us to improve the overall baseline schedules from a process improvement standpoint. So that's all I have for today, and I will transition that over to Bobby Hilliard in Program Control.
All right, thank you, Kay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bobby Hilliard. I'm the Program Control Administrator. Okay, just to give an overview of what we're going to talk about, we'll just briefly describe our office and the role that we play in delivery. We'll highlight scheduling tasks, and then we'll conclude with some of the goals of our office as well. So this is our org charts. In the center, we have Derek Brown as the state scheduling administrator. We also have Jason Crane as our lead scheduler and analyst. And then we've got our schedulers, Say, Krista, Rhonda, Brahmara, and Quentin, who provide the actual schedule activities, strategies, planning, and keeping everything updated. We do have Robert Hughes as a data analyst, and Malik Al-Kush in terms of the LAP and PDP coordination, training, and programming. And all of this supports the role in terms of delivering the program, whether it's training, the analytics, as well as the actual schedules themselves. Pretty much our mission statement for the office is basically we're responsible for safeguarding the efficient delivery of the department's construction work program. We do that looking at advanced analytics to monitor, control, and report programmatic data with quality customer service. In terms of our core functions, P6 is our official scheduling tool, critical path method. We use this again for planning, scheduling, and controlling the projects. Also, one of the roles is for us to actually administer the actual application in terms of providing access, profiles, and keeping everyone up with the actual functionality of the software. That's similar for T-Pro as well. We grant permissions for the access based upon your use, function, and what your needs are. And then again, LAP program. This is very important because what we do here, we have an opportunity not only to engage GDOT, the local LPAs, but we get a chance to train consultants as well as everyone within the department to make sure that we're on the same plane when it comes to knowledge. And the last part of this is PDP training and manuals. Excuse me. And how we do this, how we use this information, we conduct monthly let status, right-of-way status, schedule review meetings on a monthly basis. And this allows us to access information from your teams, as well as we can report and be accountable to management in terms of supporting the overall construction work program. And also, we'll use this to provide a risk assessment. We'll make recommendations to the delivery of the program. And also, it provides us with some history in terms of how we can use that information to share with other offices, as well as project managers. So again, this is our team. And what we bring together through their experience. We've got a wide, broad band of knowledge and experience. In addition to that, we're constantly engaged with the offices. So we're constantly learning about new policies and procedures about how our SME offices functions, what limitations they have, what some of their goals are as well. So that allows us to stay relevant in terms of keeping our schedules active and meaningful for the team as well as for management. Looking at our scheduling tasks, foremost, our key tool for us is communication. This requires basically for us is to be able to listen to what our customers are asking of us, provide them with feedback, guidance, and knowledge, whether it's related to the schedules, how they attempt to approach projects as well. And then we go through the PDP process in terms of compliance. A lot of times we'll be asked to provide a schedule, whether it's a local project or either a GDOT project that may have an aggressive schedule. We're tied to the logic to make sure that we comply with the PDP. And that's why it's so important for everyone to take the PDP and LAP training to make sure that you understand what our objectives are. And at time to time, we may not agree. So it's our job to keep everyone in check in terms of PDP compliance. Also, we provide assistance with the PTIP process, creating schedules, templates, and then this culminates in our schedule review meetings, where everyone's had a chance to go through the PTIP process, bring all their information together, including risk, assumptions, and then from there, we can approve schedules, and that becomes the baseline which everyone is going to work off on to deliver the projects to meet the milestones. The other tool is a project change request form. At time to time, a lot of times we'll start off with the project. We may not know the full ramifications of the actual scope. We may encounter difficulties or challenges that may cause us to actually need to change projects. So this is a tool where we can go back and reset the baseline based upon information that no one has any control over, which means the schedule's not recoverable. So we're forced to actually go ahead and update the schedule. And then again, our checkpoints are let status and right-of-way status meetings to make sure that we're meeting our targets, and we provide information on metrics as well. Goals, what we want to do and we want to establish is that we want everyone to feel comfortable that the P6 schedules are accurate and they're used as a reliable source for communicating project status. This is for the team as a whole, as well as management. So the more accurate information we have and the more often and frequent you update your schedules, the more reliable these schedules are. And with that, it will promote consistency. And also, this allows us to be a resource to the project delivery team in terms of our goals. And one of the questions that we'll always ask, we may not ask it, or at least we're thinking it, is your schedule updated? How often do you update P6? And this is something that we want to make sure that everyone is consistent with how they're communicating to the team, because if you have 4 out of 6 people updating on a regular basis, but that the other 2 that are not updating the information could be valuable information, and it's not projecting the right delivery date, as well as the updated activities in terms of when you can actually complete assignment or task. So these are some of the project schedules. We have our initial schedule development, and basically we'll get into that on the next slide. But basically this kind of sets the tone. Once a project is programmed, we've got an aggressive schedule to get a schedule on that project with the project manager and SMEs, so that we can start working on that project and kind of hold dates. We also support the maintenance, safety, low impact bridge programs. We've got our widening projects, design build, utility adjustment schedules, and construction time estimates. So all these are kind of unique to their own different programs and their needs, and we support them in different ways. Some have full control over those actual activities. Other ones, we'll set it, we'll maintain it, control it, and allow you just to update it. But throughout all this, what we need to do is make sure that we're adhering to the letting schedule for bidding administration. And this is how we get projects out on the street, get them for bid and get them out to the public. So looking at schedule development. So once a project is programmed through the planning or either the program manager, whether it's bridge, traffic, operations, maintenance, etc., we've got a timeline that we actually want to get a schedule on these projects. So we have a 4-month duration. We've set up a tracking mechanism. I'm sure you get for those project managers. They'll get emails from scheduling administrator on the status of these projects that have just been programmed, letting them know where they stand with getting an actual schedule on those projects. And the ultimate goal is to get it through schedule review so that we can actually get a baseline schedule on it, and then everyone can look at where we stand with that particular project. So what we've looked at is what are some of the top delay reasons for schedules when it comes to us shifting either dates or PCRFs. And these are some of the top reasons. Number one is programmatic shifts. This could be that maybe we start out with a project, it takes a little longer, the funding year doesn't necessarily match up with our readiness of delivering it. So that's one of the number one reasons for delays in terms of shifting projects, followed by procurement and then funding. And a lot of these are interdependent. If you've got a design change, it may or may not impact environmental and right of way. So these are interdependent upon each other, a lot of the subsequent delay reasons. When we look at overall, just in terms of what we putting out on the street, a lot of times when we're programming projects and we'll have dates that we're trying to get schedules on. As we close near the end of the fiscal year, one of our objectives is to try to avoid putting projects in May and June. We know traditionally we're edging up on the end of the fiscal year. This creates additional problems, whether it's STIP amendments, modifications, funding issues, and things of that nature. So what we try and do is look at the lettings, we try and balance it to make sure we've got a more strategic approach so that we can actually deliver the project and get work out more consistently to the contractors. So a lot of times this is the reason why you may hear David and Albert wanting us to hold certain let dates. but this is more of the programmatic and strategic level of delivering the program. Now this is exciting. This is relatively new. This is what we call SAM, which is our Schedule Activity Matrix. And really, it's a tool for everyone. You can access it through the homepage, through employees, through the Employee Center. But basically, it's a database of all schedule activities that if you want to find out what some of the relationships are between a particular activity or an office, this allows you the activity to kind of give you the background, the history of what that activity is, the interdependencies on predecessors, successors, and who the people are in terms of responsible for providing those activities. And Rhonda Niles spent a good amount of time meeting with the individual offices to better understand their needs so that we can actually develop, incorporate all these activities and just keep the logic updated so that we can deliver the program more efficiently. The next slide here is just a list of some of the options. So you can search either by activity number, by office, keywords, either by work breakdown structure. This provides an overall description of these things. And actually, if you click on the actual activity number, it will drill down and give you expanded information and additional knowledge on this as well. So our scheduling tools, foremost is communication. It's imperative that we be able to listen to what your needs are, understand what you're trying to accomplish. At the same time, we are going to provide you with some feedback, comments based upon historical knowledge and what we know based upon delivering projects, meeting metrics, and et cetera. So communication, we've got our SharePoint site, which is a great tool. We list a lot of information, such as our P6, TPRO, our SAM, Georgia 411, and basically just job aids and things of that nature as well. We also list templates, the different types of templates that we use to develop schedules. So again, this is information that's a resource to you before you get started, as well as once you're in it as well, to be able to stay abreast of how we approach schedules. Again, this is a bigger look at the SharePoint site. Again, this is a tool that's set up for you, and it's a way that we can communicate to you the status of things. Also, you've got access to PCRFs, things of that nature. So it's in a work queue. You can find out what the status is, when it was submitted, where it is in our process, when it was approved, as well as you've got historic information on them as well by projects and things like that. Okay. All right, so next I'd like to turn it over to program delivery.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Crystal Stovall-Dixon, and I am the Assistant Office Head in the Office of Program Delivery. And I will be speaking to you about understanding project schedules. And my slide is not advanced. Okay, hold on. There we go. Like I said, I'll be discussing communicating, updating, and revising the project schedule. So communicating the schedule. The P6 schedule is created prior to a project being advertised if the design work is going to be consulted out. Activities and durations are solicited from the subject matter expert offices. And an estimated notice to proceed date for task order number 1 is assumed. The schedule is then reviewed and approved by the schedule review committee. The approved schedule is provided during the advertisement phase so that firms may evaluate their resource capacity and availability to meet the approved schedule. In the past, we've had issues with awarding a contract to a design consultant, and they weren't aware of what the department schedule was. So they put in for the job, but they didn't know what the timeline requirements were. So now we make sure that the approved schedule is provided during the advertisement. So the GDOT project manager will export the schedule from P6 and provide it to the project team via Excel or PDF at the project kickoff meeting. So if you do not get a copy of the P6 schedule for the project that you're working on, be sure to ask the project manager for that. Prime consultants should ensure their subs are given notice to proceed as soon as possible. And they should also provide the subs with a copy of the P6 schedule. And one thing to note here is that our contract expiration date is not the deliverable due date. We've had some issues in the past with subs, mainly thinking that the due date for their deliverable is when the contract expired, and that's not the case. The deliverable due date is given in the P6 schedule, and that's what needs to be adhered to. GDOT normally makes the contract expiration date longer than the deliverable due date on purpose, in case the deliverable is submitted and it needs rework and it has to go back. We don't want the contract to expire before the deliverable is actually approved, because we don't want anyone working under an expired contract. So that's why normally our contract expiration dates are in excess of what the deliverable due date is. The project team should discuss the schedule at each monthly or bi-monthly team meeting. Okay. What should be discussed is our schedule risks should be reviewed, new risks should be identified, and an appropriate mitigation strategy should be discussed. So if you're in a project team meeting, a monthly or bi-monthly project team meeting, and the schedule is not on the agenda, then you, as a project team member, should raise your hand and say, let's talk about our schedule. During the meeting, emphasis should be placed on upcoming milestones and their leading indicators. Unfortunately, prime consultants do not have access to the full P6 schedule of the department. Therefore, they'll have to create an internal schedule for themselves and their subs based on the P6 due dates for deliverables and the milestones. They need to ensure that sufficient time is built in for early submittals to the GDOT PM for OPD review prior to the P6 due date. And usually this is about 5 business days in advance if it's not already built into the P6 schedule. Activities that are leading indicators to milestones. For concept report, The leading indicator is receive environmental study area layout. For PFPR, it's we have two, which are receive preliminary plans to begin tech studies and preliminary roadway plans start. For right-of-way authorization, we have PM requests PFPR. And then for FFPR, we have requests BFI, if there's a bridge on the project, request second submission utility relocations, and submit plans for environmental lockdown. So all of these are leading indicators to milestones. And if we start these leading indicators on time and we finish them on time, then it is very likely that the milestone will also be achieved on time. Okay, updating the schedule. The GDOT project managers are responsible for updating their own activities and those of the design consultant in P6. Because as I said before, our prime consultants do not have access to the full P6 software due to the limited number of licenses that we have. So it is the GDOT PM's responsibility to update their activities. The GDOT SME offices are responsible for updating their own P6 activities. And there are a few exceptions. The Office of Environmental Services, they contract with consultants to update some of their P6 activities. And the Office of Utilities, since they have so few activities, currently the PMs, the GDOT PMs are updating those. Now, schedules may be revised via two forms, and Bobby did talk about one of those in his presentation from Office of Program Control. But the two forms are the schedule modification form and the project change request form. So let's look at, and each form is completed by the GDOT project manager and submitted to Office of Program Control for approval. So now we'll look at those in a little more detail. The schedule modification form is used to revise the notice to proceed date for task order number 1 only. So if you have a late NTP, what the GDOT PM will do is use this schedule modification form to adjust the baseline schedule by the amount that the NTP was late. So for instance, if you got NTP 2 months late, the entire schedule will be shifted 2 months to account for the late NTP date. And that's what this form allows us to do. The form is also used to add or delete activities. So if we find out we don't need UST phase 2, then we can use this form to delete that activity from the schedule. For example, the form is also used to change the environmental document type due to funding. So if we started out with federal funds and we were using a NEPA document and we switched to state funding where we don't need a document, then we can use this form. It also, this form requires SME or our subject matter expert concurrence. Our subject matter expert concurrence is not required on this particular form. So this form should move fairly quickly through the change process. Our next form is the project change request form. And this one is a little more involved and it takes a little longer to move through the change process. It's used to revise the baseline schedule when the project is behind 12 months or more. It's also used to revise the baseline when right-of-way and/or construction authorization fiscal years are being impacted. And SME concurrence is required for this form. So OPD metrics, and Kay touched on this a little bit earlier on, but I'll just end with a recap. Projects with approved schedules, that's one of our OPD metrics, and the target is 90%. Projects meeting baseline for submitting concept reports, our goal is 85%. Projects meeting baseline for requesting PFPR is 85%. Projects meeting baseline for requesting FFPR is also 85%. And projects with a cost estimate up to date, that is 95%. So as you can see, the Office of Program Delivery has a lot of different metrics, and your input as a valued team member is very important in helping us achieve those metrics. And that is all I have. Thank you.
All right, we are going to jump into questions, and we had quite a few really good questions come in for the presenters. So I'm gonna run through those and we'll see how much time we have. If your question did not get answered, we are planning to take questions that were not answered during the presentation and do a Q&A afterwards. So be on the lookout for that. The first question, which of the participating offices uses baseline schedules as a metric? Which do not? And Kay, I believe that was directed at you.
Yes, we have 9 of the 37 offices at GDOT that use baseline schedules as a performance metric. And this is just because there are certain offices at GDOT that are involved in the delivery process, and there are certain offices that are not. There are certain offices like at GDOT that have their own baseline schedules and that manage their own, such as the Office of IT Infrastructure and IT Applications, as well as the Office of Innovative Delivery. The offices that are in that do have baseline performance measures are the Offices of Program Delivery, the Offices of Program Control, the Office of Environmental Services, the Office of Right-of-Way, Design Policy and Support, Materials and Testing, Utilities, Roadway Design, and Bridge Design, and that include, or Bridge and Structures, which includes bridge design and bridge maintenance. So I guess really 10 overall. I believe that's it. If I left anyone out, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Kay.
Mm-hmm.
And another one, how is performance measured when there is not a concept?
Maybe Bobby can assist with that, but if does that mean if there is not a concept on the schedule? I assume maybe Bobby can jump in with that.
Well, this is Crystal, and
Okay.
I can jump in. The other metrics are then applied. So if the project, it may not have a concept report, but it would have PFPR, it would have possibly right-of-way authorization and FFPR. And there are other metrics as well.
Thank you, Crystal.
You're welcome, Kay.
Are there audits of locals to ensure PDP compliance?
Well, yeah, this is Bobby. So in terms of LAP, we have both our office, program control, as well as program delivery that does compliance checks as well as audits. So program delivery does a compliance check. We do GDOT audits, and then FHWA, they will perform audits on local public agencies as well.
Thank you, Bobby. Are P-TIP materials available for reference?
This is Crystal. P-TIP materials are available for reference. They are stored in our ProjectWise filing system. And if you're not a GDOT employee, you can request copies of those from your project manager. If you are a GDOT employee, you can just refer to ProjectWise.
Thank you, Crystal. What are the reasons/elements for why procurement is the second largest percentage of schedule delays?
A lot of that has to do with scoping of the contract, and then coming to agreement on man hours. A lot of times the scope really is not defined as well as it should be, so we have to go back and do rescoping. And we see this a lot when we have internal man hours that are different than the consultant man hours. So if we have a big gap in those two man hours, then we know someone didn't understand the scope appropriately. So we have to go back and rescope and make sure that everybody understands the assumptions that are being made and the work that needs to be accomplished. And then once, I think that's pretty much the primary reason. But once the scope is defined, then, like I said, we go into negotiations with regards to man hours. That can take time. And then the actual routing of the contract may also take some time as well to get all parties signed and the contract executed.
Thank you, Crystal. Can the baseline schedule be updated after a consultant is under contract? The consultant should be able to evaluate the activities and determine if they are achievable based on actual and up-to-date project information.
Well,
yeah,
I'll take this one. So basically, through the process, we use the PM and the SMEs to provide the information on what's a plausible schedule, what's reasonable, and we kind of set the tone. We don't necessarily want our consultants kind of dictating what the schedule should be. That's up for us to kind of manage the program. And we're using historical information as well as what the SMEs are telling us based upon the scope as well as the risk for that particular project. So unless we find out something different, we will not allow anyone else to update the baseline. And the number one strategy is to try and recover. To change the baseline as a last resort. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. Thank you, Bobby. As I said, we provide the schedule during the advertisement period, and that's an opportunity for the consultant firms to take a look at the schedule and see if they have the resources and availability to meet the department schedule.
Is SAM available to be accessed by those external to GDOT?
I'd have to say no. However, it is downloadable. So I think in its current form, we could probably have anyone internal go there and download it and then share it. So we can provide access that way.
And another question on SAM. Does SAM also include more detailed information on P6 tasks?
Yes, it does. Yes, it it provides the narrative of why the tasks are established, some of the logic, and then also it keeps historical information. So we may have activities that we no longer use. This provides a narrative of why we changed some of the previous activities to current activities as well. So there's a good bit of history in there as well.
All right, and we're running ahead of schedule, so we'll keep on with the questions. The chart shows how the department balances lettings. Is there any effort to balance workloads on the way to those lettings, or is that not relevant to this program?
I think we want to look at, for the most part, we're looking at projects individually in terms of their readiness. We've got the baseline, and based upon the baseline, that's our commitment to the funding, to the public, to deliver those projects. When we look at balancing the lettings, that's looking at more of a executive management decision in terms of we've got funding constraints. There's different pots of money that we have to look at as well. So that it's not necessarily relevant, but we can take those in consideration.
All right, and two questions which I'll pair together. Could the prime consultants have access to the full P6 schedule as read-only? And can you tell, looking at the P6 schedule, which activities are controlling?
Well, this is Crystal, and Bobby probably could answer this better, but I don't believe P6 offers a read-only ability with their license. Bobby, you can chime in here.
Right. Yeah. No, you're right. For that, we would either need to export it at whatever point in time that they need to request it. But basically, their best asset is getting it through the project manager, as well as like Crystal stated, they would have downloaded their schedule. They're keeping up with their activities, and the main thing is when they've got their own particular downloaded activities, they've got better control in terms of strategizing what leading indicators are, what risks are as well. As long as they're getting current information, they should be able to predict that. And if some point in time they need an updated P6 schedule, although it's a snapshot, they would just need to request that. But in terms of having a dynamic real-time schedule, access to P6, that's not allowable right now.
Yeah, and as far as seeing the critical path, there is a view in P6 that allows you to see the critical path, and the GDOT project manager could download that view and provide it to a prime upon request.
What type of schedule analytics is being done at GDOT?
So first of all, it's predicated on us having schedules updated. So that's why we continue to preach that. Make sure that all the SMEs update their schedules on a regular basis. And with that, we can use that information. We can trust that information to look at P6 to provide the indicators. But whether it depends how detailed we want to get. If we're looking at something that's just in terms of letting the project, we can look at the scheduled let date compared to the baseline let date. Look at that delta and deviation to find out how close it is. And then we can drill down into activities. We can break it down into SME offices, maybe what their particular activities are that they control. So it's a wide variation of what we can do, and P6 is a very powerful tool as well. But in terms of that, we can highlight things in terms of whether you've got float on a particular project. We can break it down into whether you've got float in a particular phase or a particular activity. So it kind of depends on the question and what you're trying to get out of it. But we can definitely help you look at that and analyze it.
Well, thank you for those responses. And for everybody who didn't have a question answered, we will be following up, hopefully with a Q&A after the presentation. There are so many great questions coming in, so please keep that coming. And we will track those and get back to you on those. Thanks to those presenters, and we are going to shift now to roadway design. And Teresa.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Teresa Holder. I'm the Assistant State Roadway Design Engineer in the Office of Roadway Design. I'm trying to get my slides to move forward. Just 1 second. Still not able to progress it forward.
Teresa, relinquish control and I'll advance.
Okay. You can go to the next slide, Gail. Thank you. Our outline for today, we're going to review roadway design deliverables, which include our funding deliverables, our milestone deliverables, and also our leading indicator deliverables. We're going to review incoming and outgoing deliverables by phase of the PDP for concept development, preliminary plans, and final design. We're also going to review the PDP Appendix O, which includes coordination required for design and environmental. We will discuss how roadway design can delay other offices, as well as how other offices can delay roadway design. And then we'll review recovery strategies and follow up with any questions after bridge design presents. So let's talk about roadway design deliverables as far as funding, milestones, and leading indicators. Roadway design has two major milestones associated with our funding deliverables. They include our right-of-way plans preparation, which is P6 Activity 5100, and our final plan submission to Construction Bidding Administration, which is P6 Activity 95-100. And our performance metric goal is a 90% baseline delivery rate for submission of those plans. It is measured on time or ahead of schedule. Internally, we also have 3 additional milestones that we track. We track concept development, submission of that report to the PM. We track completion of preliminary plans and also completion of final plans for FFPR. And we also try to strive for a 90% baseline delivery rate on those milestone activities. This is the synopsis of the pre-construction status report. It allows us to track key activities on the overall project schedule. As you can see, our funding milestones are, again, right-of-way plans preparation and submission of final plans to CBA. And then our other additional milestone activities include completion of that concept report, completion of preliminary plans, and completion of final plans. We use the pre-construction status report to track the schedule against the baseline. We're looking at actual start dates versus the baseline start dates. And we're also looking at that start and finish date on the pre-construction status report to see if those schedules are progressing as anticipated. So leading indicators for roadway design. Basically, leading indicators are activities that have to start on time so that they do not delay other activities. So the leading indicator for concept development is submission of the environmental survey boundary to our counterparts in environmental services, P6 activity 19-322. And preliminary design, we have 4 leading indicators. We want to make sure we submit that request for first submission utilities to district utility office. And then we also want to submit any additional plans to other offices so that they can start their processes. We want to submit public meeting displays and our pavement design packages during preliminary design. So for final design, we have 3 leading indicators. Again, we're going to submit to utilities for second submission utilities so that we can receive those relocation plans. And then we're going to submit lockdown plans to Office of Environmental Services for their use as needed, and then corrected FFPR plans to our counterparts in engineering services for their use and preparing the engineer's estimate. So let's talk about incoming and outgoing deliverables by each phase for design, for concept, preliminary, and final design. So in the concept phase, our outgoing deliverable is, again, that environmental survey boundary. That is a critical leading indicator that we need to submit to environmental services so that they can begin their processes of identifying those resources within the project boundary. And they will in turn return those boundaries to roadway design. Traffic data is an important deliverable that needs to be submitted for completion of the concept report. We need that traffic data as far as doing any capacity analysis or traffic study that may need it for the concept report. So after we've completed concept development, we're going to submit that concept report to the PM, and that will be our first milestone deliverable. In preliminary phase, our incoming deliverable is the survey database. That's a critical deliverable that we need before we can begin preliminary design. And then our outgoing deliverables will consist of, again, those requests for that first submission utilities so that we can get the existing utilities back from district utilities. Advanced police scale. Thank you. So you can see we're going to submit for first submission utilities, and then we're expecting to receive those utility markups back from district utilities engineer office. We're going to submit the preliminary plans to GDOT offices after we've completed our QA review. QA plans consist of our horizontal and vertical alignment as well as our cross sections. So the assistant office head will review those geometry plans to make sure that plans are ready to go to other GDOT offices so that they can begin their processes. We're also going to prepare any public meeting displays that are needed as far as public meetings. We'll submit that to the PM's office for their review prior to scheduling the meeting with Office of Environmental Services. Advance, please, Gail. So some incoming deliverables we need from the Office of Materials and Testing. We need that soil survey summary. We need the existing pavement evaluation so that we can complete the pavement design packages and submit those to the state pavement design engineer. And once those packages are submitted, we receive our approved pavement designs and can wrap up completion of preliminary plans. So we will submit the preliminary plans to PM after we've completed our QA review. And that is our second milestone deliverable. So after the preliminary field plan review is held, we will complete any comments that may impact right-of-way plans, and we will complete our final right-of-way plans and submit those to the Office of Right-of-Way for approval. And that is our third milestone deliverable. And also, as I mentioned earlier, that's one of our funding deliverables also. So in final design, again, our leading indicator would be getting those second submission plans out to the utilities. Because again, they're on a clock where they have to submit to the utility companies and within a certain time frame to get those plans back so they can be incorporated into final design. So that could be a big delay if that is not submitted on time. And then again, after we've had the preliminary field plan review, we're going to make any corrections that are needed to the plans. And we're going to submit lockdown plans to the Office of Environmental Services. These plans do not have any changes after we submit to Environmental Services that will impact ESAs. And then after we've addressed all the comments from PFPR, we're ready to submit final plans to the PM so that they can request the FFPR inspection. And then after final plans are completed, we're going to address any comments that were received from the FFPR report and submit corrected FFPR plans to engineering services for their use in preparing the department's engineering estimates. And then again, our last milestone would be submission of final plans to CBA. This is our last funding milestone and the last milestone for design to meet. So Appendix O in the PDP outlines the coordination efforts that are required between design and environmental. Design activities are located up top in the purple, and environmental activities are below in green. It outlines all the activities that are required from concept through final design. Again, you can see our major funding deliverables occur in final design, which is right-of-way plans approval and final plans. And then the additional milestones that we are tracking in concept, that concept report layout, we need the boundaries from environmental to incorporate into that layout. And preliminary design, we're completing the PFPR plans. And then of course, in final design, we're completing FFPR plans. And the leading indicators for each phase in concept, again, that environmental study area boundary is critical. The leading indicator that really starts off all activities for environmental. And then in preliminary design, they're dependent on us to submit plans so that they can complete their technical studies. And then also any displays needed for public meetings. And final design, of course, we have the lockdown plans that are a leading indicator for them to get the necessary permits and variances, and then submission of corrected plans to engineering services for their use in preparing that designer's estimate. So let's talk about how roadway design can delay other offices. So as you can see, we have the different phase, concept, preliminary, and final of the PDP, the deliverable that's associated with each phase, the P6 number, the office that that deliverable will go to, and the activity that is held up if the deliverable is late. So for concept development, I guess we'll start with funding. And as in preliminary design, again, our major milestones are right-of-way plans, submission. If those are delayed, it will delay right-of-way plans approval and our funding authorization. And then, of course, final plans to CBA. If we do not submit those on schedule, it will delay construction funding authorization. Advance, please, Gil. And then as far as our major milestones in concept development, it's critical that we submit that concept report on time to program delivery because they have a small window from submission of the report for their review to the chief engineer approval. So any delays in submission of that concept report will delay concept approval. And then, of course, in preliminary design, if we do not submit those PFPR plans on time to program delivery, that will delay when the PFPR inspection is held. And then in final design, the same thing. If we do not submit final plans on time to program delivery, it's going to delay when the FFPR inspection is held. And then again, our leading indicators that need to start on time so that we're not delaying other offices. In concept development, that boundary needs to be submitted to environmental services so they can identify the resources. We need to submit plans to other offices such as OMAT for soil surveys and any other reports that are needed. If there are any structures on the project, plans need to be submitted to bridge design so they can start their design processes. And then, of course, utilities. We need to make sure we're getting those plan requests out to utilities on time because they're dependent on external stakeholders for delivery of those items. And then it's critical that lockdown plans are submitted to environmental services based on their deadline so that it can apply for the necessary permits and variance applications. And then, of course, engineering services, if they have a small window for preparing their engineer's estimate before the letting. And so it's critical that those corrected plans are submitted as scheduled. So let's talk about how other offices can delay roadway design. So there are a couple of deliverables in each phase that can have impacts to roadway design. In concept development, if we do not receive those ESA boundaries back from environmental, it can delay our alternative analysis. We really need to know what resources are out there to try to avoid or minimize impacts with our design alternatives. We need that traffic data back. That's critical if we need to perform any capacity analysis for widening projects, turn lanes, any traffic studies that are needed. And also for preliminary design, the survey database is the most critical element that is needed for design to begin. And also utilities. We need to make sure we get those existing utilities back in from district utilities office. It may delay the PFPR. The soil survey summary, depending on the project type and where it's located, it may be required before PFPR. And of course, the existing pavement evaluation from OMAT, we need that to prepare the pavement design package. And then in final design, the most critical item that could delay design is utility relocations. We need to make sure those are returned back within the time frame as needed so that it does not hold up the FFPR. So let's talk about recovery strategies that roadway design utilize. So our office, we have weekly team meetings with the group manager and the team to review the project schedules. And we also have monthly team meetings where we review project status. And if it's determined that schedules are getting off baseline, we have a couple of resources that we can use to try to recover those schedules. Our first one is our menu of services contract. This allows us to issue work orders with the consultant for specific tasks that can help bring the project back on schedule. We also look at additional resources within our office and see if they can assist with bringing that project back online. And then we review any overlapping activities that can occur concurrently. So from a project manager standpoint, based on information received from the team, you can decide if you want to proceed at risk. An example would be, we did not have an approved concept report, but we were scheduled to start with preliminary plans. So we moved forward with preliminary plans at risk without an approved concept report, not anticipating major changes to the concept report that will require extra design work or complete redesign of the project. And you can also look at reduced or focused deliverables, what's important for that phase of delivery. So that concludes my presentation as far as roadway design is concerned. Now I'll turn it over to Steve Gaston to discuss bridge design.
Thanks, Teresa. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Gaston. I'm an assistant state bridge engineer in the Office of Bridge Design. Sorry about that. Here we go. So the easiest way to kind of talk about the activities in the bridge office is to kind of highlight them on the pre-construction status report. So the two key activities that the bridge office are involved with are the preliminary bridge design summary and the final bridge design summary. I'm guessing a lot of people out there can count. You notice that I highlighted 3 activities on this report. The third one is the BFI report, and the reason I highlighted it is it's tied in very much so to both the preliminary and the final bridge design summaries, and I'll look at that and highlight that in a minute. But to dive a little deeper on the P6 activities for those design summaries, if you go into P6 on the preliminary design summary, it's actually split up into either the preliminary bridge layout development, which would be when we have a grade separation, or for a bridge hydraulic study and layout development, which would be when we have a bridge over a stream or a waterway. Another kind of key highlight that's kind of embedded in the P6 activities is there's an activity for receiving the local or consultant designed plans for review by GDOT. Likewise, for final phase activities, for final bridge plans, we have some embedded stuff in P6 as well. But some of these actually highlight the interaction between the bridge design and the bridge foundation investigation report. So we have to send a letter called the foundation recommendation letter to the geotechnical engineer so they can continue with their design. Or actually, we receive that from the geotechnical engineer. Then we send to them the load letter that shows the size of the foundations and the loads that are going to be on it, and the geotechnical engineer then uses that to produce the BFI. And then again, you'll see that we have an activity for final plans for the consultant to submit the final bridge plans for review by the bridge office, and usually that submittal will be done by the project manager. And again, this is a graph I made several years ago when we first started having this overlap of the bridge foundation investigation and the final bridge design to kind of highlight how integrated these two activities are. And you can see that the BFI doesn't begin until we've completed the preliminary layout. It's usually scheduled on the schedule to start the very next day. but we can't finish the bridge plans until the BFI has been done. But you'll see that there's that FR portion in there and the loads portion. That's the foundation recommendation report, which we have to receive from the geotech engineer, which they have to do a lot of their activities first before they can send that to us. And then we have to take that information and produce the loads letter, give back to them so they can finalize the BFI. Now, after those activities, we do have metrics in the bridge office that we get measured against. The first one is our delivery of preliminary plans versus the baseline schedule. So that'd be our preliminary layouts and hydraulic studies. Our goal for that is 90%. We also have a similar metric on final bridge plans to be delivered per the baseline schedule. And that goal is also 90%. Now, the other metric that we have isn't tied into baseline schedules. It's actually based on the quality of our plan. So we'll score, each bridge we do gets a score, and then our goal on that is to at least achieve a score of 85%. So now let's talk about some of the obstacles to delivering preliminary plans, preliminary bridge plans. So one of the things that can happen is we get a late, we don't get the request to start the preliminary plans until after the baseline start date. The main thing that can cause this is procurement issues, and that would be like a late notice to proceed to a consultant. Now, the focus of this slide is actually internal delivery of preliminary bridge plans. So the question should be, that's why I've got the question mark there, is why are we waiting on consultants for internal work? Well, there's a lot of projects out there where consultants are doing a portion of the design, even maybe the roadway design, but the bridge office will be supplying the bridge plans. So we can't start our part until the consultant has started their part to prepare the roadway plans for us. Also, sometimes there's a delay because when we do receive the request to start the preliminary plans, there's not enough information in it for us to begin it. Sometimes it's the survey that was performed doesn't extend to the full extent of the project that it needs to, so we can model the stream correctly. Sometimes there's delays in acquiring the FEMA data for FEMA floodplain studies. And then again, sometimes it's when just the data that comes to us, maybe the roadway plans don't have all the alignment information in them. So we have to kind of send it back and request more information before we can begin the study. Some of the solutions to some of these obstacles is early coordination on the task orders so that we can get those notice to proceeds on time and keep everything else moving along. Provide our scope reviews and man-hour estimates for consultant projects in a timely fashion. And then finally, just, looking at making sure all the data is present when it's submitted to us to prepare preliminary plans. And we're looking at currently maybe trying to put together a checklist to at least help guide PMs on that submittal. Some obstacles for delivering of final plans. First obstacle, BFIs. This one could be where the BFI was not requested on time, or when it came in, it got kind of lost in the shuffle, so they didn't begin it when it was first requested. Another delay with BFIs could be that they also have a procurement process for a lot of those. So that procurement process could get delayed and therefore delay the start time of the BFI. Another issue that we're running into with BFIs not being done on time is there is a lot of work out there to perform BFIs. And one of the key operations of that is the drilling aspect of it. And there's only a few companies that are able to provide these services for the state. So sometimes it's just they're all so busy they can't get started on the BFI until a later date after what was estimated for the schedule. Some of the solutions for this is we currently have a BFI tracking spreadsheet that we coordinate with both program delivery and the Geotechnical Bureau to try to make sure these things are staying on task. Another thing that could help is trying to maybe incorporate BFI task in the preliminary plans task order and not wait till a later task order, or even I've seen sometimes where they try to incorporate into the final task order, which is way too late to begin the BFI. Now, those were both, again, mainly focused on internal delivery, but there are, obstacles to delivering of consultant plans as well. Again, with consultant plans, sometimes there's an issue with the late notice to proceed. Sometimes when they're submitted to the bridge office for review, we don't have the complete package for review. They might not have included the design notes, the roadway plans, or the BFI to be done. And in regards to the BFI, the bridge plan shouldn't be submitted to the bridge office for review until the BFI has been reviewed and accepted by the geotech office. And the reason for this is we don't want to review a set of plans based on a draft BFI and then have the BFI be changed and then have to essentially go back through that review process again. And then another issue that we do run into is sometimes the plan submitter are poor quality. And this has a twofold effect. The first effect is it just takes longer to review a set of plans that aren't up to a good quality, because you have to spend a lot more time looking at it. And then the other thing that happens is usually when you've got a poor set of plans to begin with, it takes a lot more markups and iteration to get them up to an acceptable level. So there's additional subsequent reviews necessary at that time. So what are some of the effects if the bridge activities are missed? So if we have a late hydraulic study or preliminary bridge layout, then that can affect the request for the BFI, and we just saw how much that can affect final bridge plans as well. We can have a late request for the PFPR and PFPR inspection. And then finally, because of the delay in the PFPR process, that could also delay right-of-way activities. For final bridge plans, the two main issues that we have there is if we have late final plans, that can delay the FFPR request and the FFPR inspection. And then it can clearly affect the submittal of the final plans to keep the project going towards the letting. So one of the key things here, and I think everybody saw in both the presentations by program delivery and by roadway design, that they actually have metrics to measure them requesting and getting to PFPR and requesting and getting to FFPR. So one thing that we've introduced probably over the last couple of years is the process for having a waiver. So in order to go to a field plan review, whether it's preliminary or final, engineering services has a checklist or a check mark that basically says that you have to have an accepted bridge layout or final plans. So in order to try to keep some schedules moving along, we have come up with this process of bridge waivers where the PM can submit a request, and then we will review it on a case-by-case basis for the project. And the purpose of this, again, is to provide a courtesy of making sure that the project remains on schedule for bridges that will have minimal risk of going to PFPR or FFPR with the current information. Some of the criteria for this waiver, though, is if it's final bridge plans, we don't want to go to FFPR unless we have that accepted BFI by geotech. We've had a couple of times where we've got burned by that, where we went at risk, and then the BFI came back and it was very different than what got reviewed at FFPR. Also, the bridge plans need to have been submitted to the bridge office for review. We're not going to allow the project to proceed forth with plans we haven't even put eyes on. And when I say that it needs to be submitted to the bridge office, we want at least 4 weeks to have a good time to look through those plans and verify the design. It's one thing to kind of flip through the plans and say, yeah, everything looks good, but when you start diving into the actual design information, there might be some issues with the actual design that might affect what you look at FFPR. So when the waiver is requested, we do ask that you don't request it on the same day that you submit plans to us. You give us some time to review them. And what we do is after we've kind of done that verification of the design work, we'll also do just kind of a quick cursory QA review to just look at constructability issues, cost estimation, especially like pay items and things, and the overall footprint to make sure there's not any major issues that could affect the results of FFPR or PFPR. So that is all I have for today, and I'll pass it back over to Chris for questions.
Thank you very much. I do want to bring to people's attention that Albert Shelby has been answering some questions. So you may see in the Q&A box some responses from Albert, and some other presenters may take some questions that were asked previously and try to respond within the within that area as well. So please do keep monitoring that. And we do have one question. What is the reasoning behind lockdown plan submittal occurring before the FFPR? Isn't there a high risk of FFPR comments leading to conflicts within ESAs?
Hey, this is Teresa Holder. I will try to answer that question. Basically, the lockdown plans are dependent on a time frame from environmental of 38 weeks and 31 weeks before the letting. So typically for field plan reviews, those are held at least 6 months at a minimum for the letting. So that's the reason why the lockdown plans are submitted before FFPR. But you can submit the FFPR request at the same time as you submit your lockdown plans in order to avoid those risks.
Thank you for.
You said there was a connection issue, Chris?
I'm not sure that there is I think some people have been struggling a little bit with the audio or visual at different points, and hopefully for those people who are having issues, those are short-lived. I do want to let people know that we are hoping to make this presentation available, the recorded version, after the presentation. So if you do cut out and miss a little bit, then that hopefully will be there for you to access and cover any gaps. But I can speak a little bit to that question as well. I'm Chris Goodson, one of the 2 ecology section managers, and we do have time limits for our permitting that you described, where we need to submit either 31 or 38 weeks prior to let, and so that is why that has to happen at that point. I guess the question could be, why could lockdown not come after FFPR? And I think the answer to that is just that we are trying to capture and condense schedules as much as we possibly can so that we can get these projects delivered. So in a lot of cases, it seems as though they're able to keep those, not that there's no changes, but changes that we'll talk about in the next session, which is the environmental session. We'll talk about hot button issues. So that's something that we'll get into at that point. Have one more question. If direction given by a GDOT PM to meet the baseline schedule creates additional effort and risk on the project, what is the process they should go through to get confirmation? And that might be one that is best answered by Crystal. I think she may have dropped off after her section. Albert, if you're on the line and have a response to that, then that would be great. But maybe we can just come back to that one later once we've chatted about it with the presenters. Thank you for that question. Let's see. The response is escalate to the DPM. I'll post that. Another question, explain why projects that are ready for letting are put on the shelf, which may, depending on the duration of the on the shelf phase, require redoing much of the work already done. How is that cost effective and the best use of taxpayer funds?
This is Bobby. So that is a challenging question and scenario. And really, I'll first speak just from the delivery team, knowing how hard the PM and the SMEs worked to get a project to the point of delivering. But at the end of the day, planning is looking at balancing basically the STIP or TIP. So there are additional influences that may affect basically the funding and how projects and phases are programmed. So we can't necessarily worry about that. We have to be concerned with readiness of delivering the project and the program, and that will take care of itself. But ideally, everyone would love to get things done as quickly as possible, but it's not always that simple.
Thank you for that, Bobby. And seeing no further questions, we are going to take a 15-minute break. So please try to be back here right about 2:25. Thank you very much. Hey folks, we are coming back in just a minute. So take your seats and we'll get going in just 60 seconds here. For those asking if there is any sound, there should not be any sound right now. We are working through some technical issues and we will be right back. And if you can't hear me, then yes, there is no sound.
Okay, can you hear me, Chris? Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, great. Sorry for that technical difficulty, everyone. My status bar was having issues and wasn't coming up. So we're going to start the slides for Office of Environmental Services. And my name is Bobby Dollar. I'm one of the environmental program managers over districts 1, 2, and 4 in the Office of Environmental Services. So I'm going to start us off here and talk about the agenda. And so we're going to just do a brief overview of some of the environmental fundamentals. We're going to spend most of our time on the environmental milestones and the activities and the time needed to reach these milestones. We're going to highlight on some factors that jeopardize meeting some of these schedules. And finally, we're going to give a few ways to remain on schedule. Sorry, it seems I lost control of the slides here. Now I've got it back. Apologize for these technical difficulties. Okay, some of the environmental process fundamentals are on this slide here. The environmental process documents a major important decision of the project, and it's what we're actually going to do. It determines what the impacts are and how we will address those impacts. The document and reports disclose the environmental impacts and how will they be factored into the decision, including both commitments to avoid and minimize impacts as well as mitigation, if any, to offset the impacts that could not be avoided. It's an integral part of the project development and not an add-on or a process unrelated to design. This is a multidisciplinary effort that requires collaboration among other project teams, consultation with a number of outside agencies, and involvement with the public. And it is required by numerous laws and guided by countless federal and state regulations.
So this slide's a little busy. You might not be able to see everything on here, but this is the process flow that maps out many activities required to comply with these laws and regulations and their relationship to PDP milestones. You'll notice there's 3 major groupings right here that we've outlined: the environmental resource identification, technical studies, environmental document, or the NEPA document. We identify which environmental resources are present, and then the environmental and design team members must work closely to avoid and minimize project impacts. And this is done at A3M. It's the Avoidance and Minimization Measures meeting. Now, as you can see, environmental activities are integral throughout the concept development and preliminary design. I'm having trouble advancing the slides, so Chris, if you're doing that, thank you. So in addition to resource identification, technical studies, and the environmental document, we're also going to touch on certifying for right-of-way authorization, environmental permits and variances, and certifying for LET. Can you advance the slide? Thank you. Let's look at the process flow. Advance the slide. Thank you. Note that surveys for environmental resources are undertaken only after design has provided the layout for the environmental survey boundary. You know, many people have touched on this, so you've probably already heard this term ESB already. Resources are identified regardless of whether there's state or federal funds being involved. There's 4 disciplines are tasked with identifying resources that are laid out in this slide here up above, and are generally allowed 6 months to complete this effort. They must get underway at the same time. So some of these tasks include early coordination and background research, subject matter expert field work, compiling the results of that field work, and begin drafting those reports. Agency field visits might be required if needed after the field visits. And we finalize the reports. We provide quality assurance, quality control of those reports, agency concurrences of the reports, and submitting delineations to design. You can advance the slide here. So what happens if we're maybe running 2 or 3 months behind on the ESB and we're late? There's the chance that we're going to miss our A3M. So we're going to be late on that. Advance the slide, please. Resource identification efforts may reveal issues that require additional time not allotted for the schedule, but this doesn't happen often. We just wanted to note that these are a couple of examples that, you know, we may run into if, you know, we're falling behind on the schedule that we didn't account for. Advance the slide, please. Now, Chris Goodson's going to talk about resource ID up through right-of-way authorization.
Hey, thanks, Bobby. And sorry, I had that same issue that you just had with my bar not showing up. So once resource identification is complete, then we are going to go to what we call an A3M, or Avoidance and Minimization Measures meeting. The A3M marks the transition from resource identification into technical studies for environmental. And if you attended our ESB session, then you also attended our A3M session, since they were held at the same time and may have heard more about that. So as this slide shows, preliminary plans are not finished until after A3M. And we also will need cross sections to be able to go to that A3M. Coming out of that A3M, where we've had that conversation between environmental and roadway design and bridge, and oftentimes, or we are trying to incorporate utilities and construction into that as well, we develop those cross sections and project footprint, and then we will submit the preliminary plans for technical studies. And again, technical studies being for environmental technical studies. But we really want to be careful about what we call hot button changes. Hot button changes, and I won't read through the entire list, are any changes that could potentially affect the technical studies aspect of the environmental process and any coordination we might have with our agencies. And I come from an ecology background and know that some things that really don't affect the ecology side of things really may affect other environmental specialties. And so I think it's just very good to coordinate with your environmental project team to make sure that you're not having any of these hot button changes. The obvious ones are anytime you may have a change in right-of-way or easement, or your cut and fill lines that may be within an ESA. That's definitely something that you'd want to coordinate, but there is a long list of other ones, which you can see here. And so as we get into tech studies and we receive those preliminary plans, we're going in and creating our documents. We're figuring out, assessing what those effects are to all of our different environmental resources. And there's 6 different disciplines that are part of that. Air noise is not typically doing something during the resource identification phase, but they are assessing what the potential impacts are during tech studies. And you can see here that we are trying to complete these tech studies leading up to PFPR, and we typically have about 7 months to do so. So it's important to remember that we need those preliminary plans, and there really can't be many changes after that leading up to our tech studies and up into PFPR. We can make changes after PFPR and after right-of-way going into lockdown. So if we do receive those preliminary plans late, or we have those hot button changes that may come in late, then it really has the potential to miss delays, or we miss our tech studies date and we have delays to PFPR. So that's just something that you want to keep in mind, and that's typically not, we get requests all the time to advance to PFPR without completing those, and that's really something we try to avoid if we can. So there are a few things that can delay tech studies that are sometimes outside of our control or not foreseeable. Formal Section 7 takes longer to go through with our resource agencies than informal Section 7 or no effect. And so that's something to be aware of. If you have 4F on your project or public controversy, or if you really have any project that has resources associated with national marine fisheries, then that's something also that has the potential to delay your project. And when you identify that you will have any of these issues on your project, it's very important to discuss with the project team and make sure that you come up with a plan to navigate that and see where you may be able to shave time elsewhere. And after we get through PFPR, then we are heading into right-of-way, and we have to have that environmental certification for right-of-way. And so you can see the time scale here of where PFPR happens around that month 3 mark. And then when we have corrected PFPR plans and ultimately those right-of-way plan sets that is required for environmental certification that goes into that environmental document. But if we receive those hot button changes made at PFPR late, then that's really going to delay our project. And we are going to have delayed right-of-way authorization and a late environmental document. So that's just something really to keep in mind at PFPR, is if those changes are absolutely needed, and try to identify those much earlier in the process. And so that time frame between the CE approval and certification, you can see that time frame right here. And again, hot button changes are going to ultimately delay that right-of-way authorization. That moves us into the last phase, which I'll hand over to Miles.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to go ahead and request control. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move into discussing lockdown plans as well as permit and variances. To meet this scheduled let date, impacts to protected waters and buffers cannot change once the applications are being prepared. Lockdown is before final field plan review, so if any changes that affect waters or buffers are made at FFPR, the let date will be affected. Any changes affecting the let date that are made after the lockdown date must receive the approval of the Director of Engineering. And again, all hot button changes must be received 4 weeks prior to the lockdown date to allow for evaluation and agency consultations. So this timeline here shows the work needed to obtain permits and variances. Individual permits should be applied for 5 months before certification, which is 7 to 8 months prior to the let. This allows approximately 6 to 8 weeks between the impact lockdown and submitting the application to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Buffer variances need to go to EPD 3 or so months before certification, which is about 6 months prior to the let. Nationwide and regional permits should be applied for in that same time frame. This allows approximately 5 to 6 weeks between the impact lockdown and submitting the applications to the agencies. So essentially, there will be little time between lockdown and submittal to prepare and review applications. So what happens if changes are made after lockdown and applications are already underway? Current Section 7 and Section 106 findings are needed not only for the NEPA reevaluation, but also for the Section 404 permit applications. So you would have to redo reports and studies as well as the applications prior to submittal. And without a permit and variance, the contractor would not be able to go to work. This timeline here shows the work needed in addition to permits and variances prior to certification for let. Again, we certify 11 weeks prior to the let for both federal and state funded projects. Once right-of-way and final design are underway, we anticipate what are hopefully minor changes. However, as has been noted, hot button changes must be received 4 weeks prior to lockdown to allow time to update studies and reopen agency consultations. So this is getting back to that question earlier about lockdown and the necessity of it. Again, we're kind of getting back into environmental reevaluation, so that timing is crucial. As you can see, we have 4 weeks to update studies, which does not allow time for agency consultation. So these have got to be minor change memos if we're going to remain on schedule. Any larger changes could potentially jeopardize the schedule. Also, federal aid reevaluation should go to the Federal Highway Administration or FHWA 5 months before the let. Please note that this is the only difference between state and federally funded projects, because for state funded projects, we wouldn't have a NEPA document, or in most cases, an environmental document whatsoever. So what happens if changes are made that necessitate reopening studies? In this circumstance, if we have hot button changes that come at FFPR, we could potentially delay the letting. So talking about hot button changes made once a task is underway will result in rework and delay. If changes extend the project outside of the environmental or the ESB, the survey boundary, additional field work will be needed. If changes are made at the environmental resources, we'll likely have to rewrite reports and reopen tech studies as well as agency consultations. In these circumstances, we would also have to redo the NEPA document. And lastly, we may also have to redo applications and pull them back from agencies so that we can resubmit based upon updates based upon those changes. So really the message we're trying to send here is that we must guard against these hot button changes once an activity is underway, or at least as much as possible. These are the milestones for federally funded projects. As we've kind of been discussing, we have environmental resource identification, environmental technical studies, preparation of the NEPA document, and then certification for right-of-way authorization, and then certification for LET. Please note that only 2 of them go away for state-funded projects. As I just mentioned, we would not have any NEPA document, or in most cases, any environmental document for a state-funded project, and we would not certify for right-of-way authorization. So on that previous slide, as we've indicated, we do not prepare an environmental certification for right-of-way authorization for state-funded projects. However, we still need to be mindful that a decision to advance to right-of-way before environmental technical studies are approved as a scheduled recovery effort will be risk-based. Because again, for state-funded projects, we would still be completing those environmental technical studies. As noted by the definition of risk shown, if events don't occur as anticipated, the next activity will, or in most cases, could be affected. So if we base a decision to advance to right-of-way on an expected agency consultation outcome and the outcome is different, we may have to back up and redesign. And in some cases, we may have purchased property that won't be needed for the project. So ultimately, there's always going to be a much better chance of the hoped for outcome if environmental resources have been identified and have been assessed, or impacts have been assessed. So right here we have a list of many common situations that jeopardize meeting project schedules. Of course, as always, any late start to any activities could have a cascading effect for following activities. Poor document quality, requiring multiple reviews and revisions could also ultimately delay us hitting those baseline schedule markers. And as we've discussed to great length at this point, hot button design changes can have huge implications if we have to go back and reevaluate based upon what essentially to us is a very different design from our initial analyses. Please note though that this is not a comprehensive list. Always be thinking about any other potential scenarios that could have effects as far as on-time delivery and meeting schedules. So on the topic of remaining on schedule, here's a couple strategies that we like to observe. Obviously, NTP, so notice to proceed to primes, is the responsibility of the department. However, if you are a prime and you're using subcontractors, they need to have their NTP to allow them to start their activities per the baseline schedule. So ultimately, they need to be basically starting and receiving their NTP per those baseline start dates. As I just discussed, revisions beyond the second version are not really built into the schedule. So third and fourth submissions ultimately could amount to subsequent delays. And as we said repeatedly, hot button changes made once we're underway always have the potential to delay delivery. And with environmental activities being a part of project delivery, our activities begin with deliverables from design. These leading indicators must be received on time if we're to deliver per the baseline schedule. And ultimately, we must remain on schedule if activities dependent on our work are to also remain on schedule. Again, we want to make sure that we're not having this cascading delay to subsequent activities that come after our environmental activities. All right, and that concludes the environmental portion. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to the Office of Utilities.
All right, thank you, Miles. Let's see. Oh, looks like everything's working. All right, so good afternoon, everybody. I'm Patrick Allen. I'm the State Utilities Engineer for GDOT. And I'm going to talk about, and in keeping with the context of everything that we've been talking about, and as far as the metrics and milestones and the baseline schedule, and how things come together and how we're focused on delivering the project. But you know, many people are familiar with the term utility coordination, and that's what we do in a nutshell. But I've kind of retitled it to add a little more purpose to it and call it active utility project management. And the goal here is not just to pass information from one person or party to the other, but really to ensure that we're having that holistic conversation and keeping in mind that utilities are involved from concept to closeout, and most often the fun for us doesn't start until construction. So it's not just about getting to let, it's getting through letting and getting through construction. So the things that we put in place and the boxes that we check through pre-construction ultimately will play out in construction. So we need to make sure we're doing right by the process and by the utility owners, recognizing that they don't build roads and we don't connect lights and water systems and things like that. So again, just be mindful of the handoffs, and you know, if we can avoid, that's the best way to go. But if we can't, then we obviously mitigate and then accommodate accordingly for utility relocations. So with that, I'll give you a little bit of information to take away about statutory requirements in state law for Georgia for utility coordination and things that we're required to do. And then also talk about some of the PDP and UAM changes for utility coordination or active utility project management, and some of the things that we've actually enhanced over the last year or so with the PDP update and with some process changes, adding a few more activities just to make sure we have those conversations during the development of the project to ensure that we've accounted for utility accommodation, mitigation, or avoidance, to borrow from environmental's A3M wording. And with that, again, just kind of putting that in the form of 4 E's, you know, to educate the team on the different aspects of the project, engaging the utility owners and the project team on the components of the project, enforcing the policies and procedures, and then empowering the team to make decisions based on information and ensure we have a successful project through delivery and on construction. So by law, in accordance with Title 32 of the Georgia Code, we have to send plans and letters to the utility companies for them to respond to and get information back to us. But by law, that duration for us to get that information to them and request it back can be no sooner than 30 days. So no matter what the type of project, we send a set of plans with a letter, it's going to be at least 30 days before something comes back. And similarly, it shouldn't take any longer than 120 days for them to get that information back. What we have built in most schedules is about, is about 60 days. But again, some of those, that 60 days is kind of generic. That number would need to be adjusted based on the project. And again, so the UAM has some recommended time frames, 30 days for the most minor projects and 120 days, you know, is for those what we would call mega projects, but in today's world, even a $40 million widening project might be a mega project or a bridge. So again, we want to make sure we're scaling those time frames based on the type of project and the number of utilities. And keep in mind that subsurface utility engineering, or SUE, is independent of that schedule. The SUE consultants, whoever's performing that service, is working on their own schedule, and then on the back end of that, they submit to the district office for SUE verification and other things. In terms of time savings and recovery, as we've been mentioning throughout this conversation, each party, the PM, the district utilities manager, and the utilities need to be mindful of the baseline start and finish dates. So for example, if a project is running a little bit behind, let's just say we got the plans 2 weeks late, there's nothing that says you can't give a utility 45 days, for example, to return a set of plans. Again, that as long as it's not less than 30, we should be fine. So again, it's about using your best judgment, and maybe we have to call in a favor to try to get something expedited, and given the type of project, sometimes we can make that, but keep in mind that there's a limited number of people working for the utility owners that are touching each one of these sets of plans across the state. So we must be mindful of workloads externally as well. So with respect to the PDP, I think for a lot of people that have been doing this for a while, they're familiar with first submission and second submission. That's kind of the catchphrases or the most utilized terms in utility coordination or active utility project management. But what we've done in the most recent PDP update, we've added a step and attached it to that first submission or SUE verification, and we're calling it the preliminary utility relocation process. And the goal there is really to have a sit down with the designer, utility coordinators or project managers in the district and have a conversation about where things are and where we think they might go. And the designers are taking that information for incorporation into the PFPR plans, or for avoidance, or just making sure we have a good right-of-way footprint. And then coming out of PFPR, we're looking to have a utility right-of-way meeting just to confirm where that right-of-way needs to be with respect to utility coordination and utility relocation. As the feds have laid out, utility relocation is a part of the project, so it must be considered throughout the design phase. And, as one of 3 certifying offices, we have to make sure that we've done our due diligence in that regard. And then it all ties back to metrics. Again, our goal for each one of our submissions is to have 95%, and that's getting information back in accordance with that baseline schedule date. Typically, we can get things done on time if we start on time. So again, that's I think Crystal and others have mentioned paying attention to those leading indicators, having the designer be aware that there's a handoff that has to happen. They need to get a set of plans together that needs to be complete and accurate to the district utilities office for distribution to the respective utility owners. If that information is not complete, again, it just will lead to resubmittals and delays on the project. So again, complete, accurate information is very important for us to ensure that we meet our 95% per baseline schedule. And then for certification, we're looking at meeting that 90% goal for certifying on time in accordance with the baseline schedule. All right, so how do we manage our metrics and milestones? There are several different pre-construction status reports for use internally. Here's a snapshot of the utilities version of that. On the left side, we have the baseline starts and finishes, and highlighted I have the activities for utilities with respect to the P6 date. So again, we're measuring those baseline starts and finishes, and we've been working with the PMs and the district utility managers to ensure that they are mindful of those dates. And again, if we can start on time, we typically finish on time. But here's a tool that most DUMs can use to ensure, check one, What is the date that needs to be met prior to sending plans to the utility owner? And then 2, if an activity has been completed, has that information been updated in P6? As Crystal mentioned earlier, the PMs are handling the updates in P6, but we have ensured that our districts have access in the event that something doesn't get updated. We can go in and fill in those gaps, and it tends to be an issue when we're running our metrics reports. If the data is not in the system, it really throws off the report. But we do have access, but the PMs are ultimately responsible for providing those baseline, those actual starts and actual finishes. All right, so an ideal timeline, I mentioned that preliminary utility relocation meeting. The way we design this, and it doesn't always work that way, but imagine a SUE project where we've sent plans to the district for distribution to the utilities for SUE verification, and that's a 120-day process, for example. At, say, the 60-day mark, we will come in and have that preliminary utility relocation team meeting and sit down and meet with the utility owners. As they're verifying their information, again, the SUE plans have been provided, so a lot of it's there. They would just need to confirm that the information is accurate, and then also give us an idea of where things might go as part of that process. So we'll have a sit-down meeting similar to a PIOH or something like that, and really have a robust discussion about where utilities are going. And again, this is really to ensure that we're incorporating everybody's information into the plans and heading downhill towards PFPR and right-of-way approval. And in some instances, this is a good time to identify what utilities might be included in the contract so that information can be provided to the environmental office give them opportunity to clear the utility relocations as part of their environmental document, particularly for those things that will be included in the contract. And again, this is a hypothetical timeline, but an ideal situation of how we think it would work or should work. And after PFPR, we'll move into a right-of-way utility meeting where the district right-of-way manager, district utility manager would meet and talk about the right-of-way footprint before right-of-way plans are approved. And these are also opportune times to talk about utility adjustment schedules and how relocations will occur once the project is let. So going back to what Bobby Hilliard talked about at the beginning, that's schedule activity matrix. I've taken a few activities out or just highlighted a few of the utilities activities, and it shows what the work breakdown structure is, who's responsible for updating, and then also just a small description of what that activity entails. And we've added 2 activities relative to SUE to really break that out so that can be almost measured independently as part of that schedule. So here's a snapshot for those utility activities that happen primarily in preliminary design. And I did not include railroad activities. Again, railroad coordination has 2 big milestones too. And again, it's the same fundamental rules apply, submitting information on time and making sure it's complete and accurate. And here we see the final design activities for second submission utilities, railroad activities, and then also utility agreements, prep and certification, which we typically start that process 6 months prior to letting cleaning up plans, getting permits in process, and doing agreements to ensure that we certify projects on time. So active utility project management. And what you see on the screen is a picture of a successful, I think it was State Route 20 project where we had the preliminary utility relocation meeting. It was very beneficial to both the designer and the utility owner. So let's ensure that you're designing with utilities in mind. Again, considering the relocations and the impacts through the plan development process and on construction. Ensure that you're participating actively in the preliminary utility relocation plan meetings or utility field meetings, which will happen on traffic signal upgrade projects or some of the small operational improvement type projects. Participating in that right-of-way utility meeting. And again, both of these, the main goal is to ensure we have a good right-of-way footprint. Typically on construction, utility delay, the first thing out of the gate they have to do is go back and acquire easements with those same property owners that we may have bought right away from months or years before. So if we can reduce that as a long-term activity, it will really help us deliver projects on construction faster. So we ended up spending a little bit more time on the front end to save time on the back end. So again, reducing submissions, just a reminder that by law, we have to give at least 30 days, but no more than 120 days, and making sure that information is accurate and discernible for utility owners who don't specialize in roadway design or roadway construction. Quality matters. As we've seen, I think Walt and Engineering Service will talk about it a little bit later, but again, we want to make sure that we are having good plans, and again, through the process, taking our time and making sure information is correct. It's not just about checking boxes and hitting dates. We want to make sure that we're also having quality as part of that as well. And again, time spent equals time saved, and it's a lot easier to address and fix things on the pre-construction side versus trying to address them in construction. And with that, I will go back with control to Katrina.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. Uh-oh. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katrina Anderson, the Assistant State Right-of-Way Administrator. I'll discuss the activities which affect the right-of-way phase and our schedule. Okay, you can move forward. Oh, wait.
All right, you got it now. I think I finally figured out how to stop control. So.
Okay, thank you. Oh, no.
Katrina, you need to request.
All right. Give me just a second.
I can advance for you.
Okay, thank you, Gail. You can go ahead and advance.
Well, I do not have control.
Okay. 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 That's great. We'll start right there. All right. So the pre-acquisition phase technically begins once the right-of-way office receives the first submission of the right-of-way plans, as you see under pre-acquisition. We also coordinate early. We coordinate early on with the utilities office and the utility companies during pre-acquisition, but could be also considered an acquisition activity. The acquisition phase starts with the right-of-way authorization or an NTP, notice to proceed, for local projects. During that time, we will ensure all of the appraisals are completed and all the offers are made to the property owners during the negotiation phase. After the acquisition phase, we hold all of the closings. If we cannot settle with the property owner, we'll also, we could possibly condemn them and possibly go to trial, which happens much after a project is let. During the post-acquisition phase, we also ensure that all property management, demolition, and removal is done prior to or during the time that we are certifying the project. And we may also have some ongoing relocation at the end of the project as well, that we do take care of during the certification process. However, it could be ongoing during post-acquisition as well. Okay. There are some major things that affect the right-of-way phase, which could delay our delivery of the right-of-way to the construction office, which include things as the right-of-way plan revisions, issues with acquiring rights from the railroad or federal state parcels or the utility companies. Also, one of the major issues is piecemealing projects. And I also will discuss there were some recovery strategies of the schedule. So what is shown here is the timeline the right-of-way office uses to determine the amount of time between right-of-way authorization and letting, which we would need to complete all the activities from pre-acquisition, acquisition, property management, and demolition and removal, and relocation. For example, if you look at the third box, let's take, for example, there's a 40 parcel project with, let's say there are 10 relocations, for example. That would typically take us 21 months to acquire from authorization to right-of-way certification. Now, you do have some projects where there may be a lot of plan revisions, maybe some issues with railroad companies or DNR parcels or something like that, that may take a little bit longer, but our goal and our mission is to ensure that we stick to the schedule as closely as possible and to certify according to the baseline schedule. And for this example, it would be 21 months. Now, we could also always deliver early. However, the typical time would be between 18 and 21 months. Now, some of the things that can delay the plan revisions could be old survey data, and those typically happens when we have projects that we take off the shelf and the survey needs to be updated, or there are design changes to existing parcels. And typically those happen when there's maybe not adequate representation at a PFPR from the right-of-way office or from another office possibly, whereas that did not, the issue that prompted the design change was not picked up early on, and the plan revision had to happen during acquisition, which delays the closing out of that parcel. If you have several of those on a project, it may delay a parcel or delay that project up to 6 months until we receive, or at least until we receive all of the plan revisions. In order to avoid some of the delays, we make sure that all the PFPR requested changes are made. We also have something called blue line corrections. So when the right-of-way plans are submitted to the right-of-way office, the acquisition team who would be responsible for acquiring the project, whether that be a consultant or one of the district team members, they will ride the project with those submitted right-of-way plans, mark them up with a blue pen, and submit them back to the right-of-way office so that we can include it in our comments to the designer to ensure that those comments are corrected prior to plan approval. That reduces the amount of plan revisions that we would have during the regular negotiations. Also, something else would be to ensure that everything is spotted on the right-of-way plans, which could affect the right-of-way. For instance, now, as you see, this picture is there's a lot of things going on this right-of-way sheet. So you don't want to put everything on the right-of-way plans, but you want to put, if you have the space without the plans becoming cluttered, to put something that would affect the cost or affect the right-of-way itself, it would be a good idea to put it on the right-of-way plan sheet, or at least have a discussion about whether or not it should be on the right-of-way plan sheet. So some of the things that we do in our office to ensure that we keep a project moving is early coordination with the railroad or the state and federal parcels, and also the utility companies. We have early coordination meeting with the utility office along with the different utility companies and program delivery to just ensure that all the utility issues are worked out prior to the first submission of the right-of-way plans, as much as possible. We also accept donations, whether they be unsolicited or, well, I say solicited donations, however, that is a violation of the Code of Federal Regulations. So there is a certain way that we can solicit donations, like say if it's a local municipality or something like that. And also we've revised how we coordinate with the railroad. So we have a certain way we coordinate with Norfolk Southern, and another way we coordinate with CXX in order to ensure that we have the right of entry for the easements that's needed, or right of entry, or early coordination by sending them documentation early. We just do have some activities where we could ensure that the parcel and the project moves forward. Railroad acquisitions, we would appraise first, along with relocation parcels. We also would ask for, sometimes we would ask for the plans to be revised. So instead of showing the railroad parcel as right-of-way, we'll ask for it to be revised to show it as permanent easement, because it would take just an extended period of time in order to acquire right-of-way from a railroad company, from a major railroad company. Now, there are some things that we can do in our office in order to recover a schedule. So one of the things that we just started doing last year was we assigned the project at PFPR to begin the preliminary right-of-way activities. Before we would assign it at right-of-way plan submission. But what we've noticed is that there's a few things that we can clear up prior to plan submission in order to progress a project moving forward. And so at PFPR, when we have a representative from the district office or a consultant to be able to ride the project and identify some issues early on versus waiting until after the plans are submitted. Whenever we can, we add additional resources. For example, if we all have a plan to have 5 negotiation agents, we can add 2 more negotiation agents or 3 more, etc., in order to acquire more parcels in a shorter period of time. Also, we have a right-of-way program manager for the districts. We have 4 of them for the 7 districts. And we have additional status meetings with our consultants and with our our staff in order to ensure that projects do not fall behind, and if so, that we can catch the issues early and resolve them in order to be able to stay on schedule or recover schedule. Our office also does on-site plan reviews prior to plan approval for our major projects. Typically, we do plan reviews sitting at our desk. Sometimes we'll look at Google Earth. Well, now, if it's a major project and it's not too far to drive, we'll go out and do a plan review on site. And that has actually reduced the amount of revisions that we had before as well. And just one other thing, that if there is a Norfolk Southern Railroad company, that typically those parcels take an additional 6 months to the schedule. But once we identify them early on during PFPR, we do try to do everything that we can in order to acquire those without adding the additional 6 months. But if we get down to a wire, that is definitely not a parcel that can be acquired quickly. And one of my favorite subjects is the piecemeal projects. Sometimes we have to start a project early without having, say, for example, an environmental clearance on an entire project. This is usually dependent upon the funding on the project where we can do that. And we'll start acquiring or doing pre-acquisition work on just a part of a project, and then we'll maybe stop and then pick up the rest of the project later. What we've realized is that spreads our resources then. We only have a certain amount of resources, even though we're trying to train more resources. We only have a certain amount of resources right now. And once you engage the resources to do certain work, and then you come back later, you may not have those resources available to take care of the remaining projects, the remaining parcels on a project. And so what we typically do is just treat that one project just as if it was two separate projects. So there may be two different consultants, two different attorneys, two different teams working on that one project that was piecemeal in order to try to keep that project on schedule. Okay. And that will be it for the right-of-way office. And Walt Taylor will be taking it over for engineering services.
Thanks, Katrina. Like Katrina said, my name is Walt Taylor. I'm assistant office head in the Office of Engineering Services. I manage the design review section. And a couple things we're going to talk about are deliverables to my office based on the during each phase. And we're also going to talk about some things that can delay scheduling a field plan review, and then open it up for questions. Now, during preliminary phase, the big deliverable to our office is preliminary field plan review. Now, the focus of the PFPR is to ensure adequate right-of-way and easements. We want to review the draft environmental documents and ensure compliance to the TIP or the STIP, and also to AASHTO and GDOT design policy, and identify any staging and constructability concerns. Again, the major focus, we want to document any potential problems and address any impacts to the project footprint. That's the key to PFPR. And also wanted to point out that the distribution of the preliminary field plan review report signifies the end of the preliminary phase and the start of the final phase in regards to flow chart there. So the timing of the PFPR, and this comes straight from our policy, but you need to request a minimum of 20 weeks so we can hold it no later than 16 weeks prior to the program right-of-way authorization date. Now PMs will need to get the plan packages in earlier to meet this deadline in order to gather all the checklist items. And I'd also like to point out at this time, the 4-week turnaround is becoming more and more difficult with just the increase in projects and the number of requests we get. It's we do our best to make it, but it is becoming tough. So the earlier you could turn stuff in, the better. Of course, make sure it's complete. Now, in the final phase of the PDP, we have an interim field plan review. Now, this is not required on every project. In fact, it's only required when it's going to take right away 30 months or more to be purchased. Now, the reason we are holding these now is to ensure that the PFPR items were implemented into the plans or to validate why they weren't. It's an accountability review to try to ensure design is moving along efficiently. Now, the timing is there's nothing sort of set in stone, but so there's some flexibility. But what I would recommend is holding the IFPR about 1.5 years prior to FFPR. That gives you a lot of time to implement any comments into the plans prior to requesting FFPR. And like I said, 1.5 years is recommended, and I would say the minimum would be 1 year prior to FFPR. And again, you got to remember these are for big projects where right away is the critical path of the final phase. So there should be plenty of time to hold it and get the comments implemented. The other deliverable during final phase is the final field plan review. Now, the request needs to be made 28 weeks prior to and completed at least 24 weeks before the scheduled let date. Again, I'll bring up the 4-week turnaround. It's pretty tough, and I just realized I skipped a slide. Pardon me. Sorry about that, y'all. So the final field plan review, the focus, again, is we want to review right-of-way easement requirements, make sure everything's accounted for. We want to ensure that the environmental commitments have been addressed in the plans. We want to make sure that AASHTO and GDOT policies are met, or that the design exception or variance has been approved. We want to confirm staging and constructability, check accuracy of pay items compared to CES or AASHTO-ware as it is now. And we also want to validate any special provisions, as well as check PFPR items, or in some cases, IFPR items have been implemented into the plans. And again, the timing needs to be requested 28 weeks prior to and completed 24 weeks. Again, the 4-week turnaround is becoming more difficult. So again, just keep in mind, these are minimums. The sooner you can request these, the better. And I'll also want to point out that the FFPR is the start of the let schedule. So any delay in this, you start to take time from other offices to get their task complete. It's very important we hold these no later than 24 weeks. Final deliverable for final phase 2 engineering services is the corrected FFPR plans. It is a PDP requirement, so we verify that all the FFPR report comments have been implemented, or again, it's explained why they weren't. Submitted no later than 18 weeks prior to let date, and it's an important milestone in the letting process because it begins the final engineer's estimate and funding authorization process. And we will distribute a review of corrected FFPR plans memo to the standard distribution list, including the PM, if the comments. And what that memo documents is FFPR comments that have not been implemented. And I also would like to point out right now, we are reviewing corrected FFPR plans on a time permitted priority basis. So we're not reviewing every single one. But if a memo hasn't been received, you can certainly move on with the next submittal in the PDP process. But the bigger submittal is to our estimators, so they can start the final engineer's estimate. So real quick, some of the things that could delay scheduling a field plan review: incomplete packages. That's a major thing. Some of the typical things we've been seeing that have been left out are ISD studies, bridge approval or a waiver. Steve mentioned approved pavement designs, especially at PFPR. And another one is they didn't follow the project-wise workflow. Some things we've seen more recently are existing utilities, and also second submission utilities, utility relocations at FFPR as well. I know we're all trying to make dates, but we got to make sure that packages are complete. There is a good set of plans that can be reviewed at field plan review. And sometimes resource availability can also affect scheduling a field plan review. You know, we're kind of competing with other meetings, be it a concept team meeting or constructability, for time, for SME's time. So if it's a busy week or couple weeks at the district level, it may push out field plan review as well. So again, just keep all that in mind when you're getting ready to request. There's nothing that says you can't request early, as long as, like I said, it's a complete package, a good set of plans. Let's see. That's it for me. So I'm going to stop control. And
All right. And so we are to our next round of questions, and we had some good ones come in, and I'm actually going to work backwards through these since you have this stuff fresh in your mind. And we'll start with, are parcels with ESAs also prioritized for right-of-way negotiations?
Katrina, can you take that question?
What was that question?
The question was, are parcels with ESAs also prioritized for right-of-way negotiations?
No, not necessarily. We prepare appraisals or prioritize appraisals based on how long it would take for us to acquire that parcel.
Is obtaining aerial right-of-way from Norfolk Southern and CSX as problematic and lengthy as acquiring land from the railroads?
Yes. And for whatever reason, they have several different people who you have to coordinate with, and it may not be the same person who you've had success with before. And therefore, things like aerial views, determining which, if they want to accept an easement or a right of entry, those things change. So we coordinate early, as early as possible.
Jumping back to environmental, Does this schedule make allowance for mitigating circumstances, inclement weather, safety concerns, hostile landowners, etc.? I guess I could field that one. The project schedule gives a certain amount of time, typically 6 months for resource identification and 7 months for tech studies. And in that time, there is time, hopefully, to be able to complete that resource identification. If you had a particularly wet season and had a lot of trouble getting out there week after week after week, especially on larger projects, then it would have the potential to affect that project schedule. But the hope is that you have enough time within that project schedule to have some flexibility in when you're actually getting out and doing your field surveys. Hostile landowners is definitely a different story, and hopefully that is not a frequent occurrence for folks, but something that we do have the ability to move forward with by contacting local law enforcement to escort us on properties and things like that.
Hey, Chris, to just add, this is Bobby Dollar, that I would just say in general, the schedule doesn't allow for those sorts of circumstances. However, just to piggyback off what you were saying, we can try to recover, but if there's situations where we can't get out there and it's going to be causing significant delays, then you just need to get with your project manager and the project team and reassess whether we need to, get a project change request form issued depending on how the delay is going to be. So I just wanted to add that.
Sure. Yeah, I think just from my experience in ecology, just getting the process started as early as you possibly can within that time frame is important. So if you're a prime, being in close coordination with your sub, making sure that you're getting started on time so that you do have the maximum amount of time to get out and do those field surveys. But thanks for that, Bobby. What is the process for addressing hot button post-lockdown changes? Is there a form the PM sends to the division director to sign, or is it a more informal process? Bobby, is that one you want to field?
I sure can. Typically, the process is involved if there's a change that involves an area that's an ESA, then it's going to have to be approved by the division director, which is her role, and that's going to be her purview whether she wants to approve that or not. So, when it comes to environmental and any changes around ESAs, it's got to be approved by the division director.
And Bobby, I'm not as familiar with exactly what that process looks like, but do you know what the process is for getting that approval? Or Gail, I don't know if that's something you might be able to chime in on.
Yeah, Gail.
Yeah, I was going to say the way the original memo reads is if it affects the schedule or the letting. And so that, as Miles pointed out, it's areas that weren't surveyed. If signalization could have implications for air quality. And of course, any change in impact at an ESA. So the PM would have to go to the division director. What I don't know is if there's a formal form they use or if they just write a memo, but something does have to be submitted to her. It's not simply a phone call. And unfortunately,
Gail, Gail, you were breaking up there a little bit. I think there's an inter-office memo that's sent by program delivery to Haral for her to approve. Maybe somebody at OPD can better address that.
Right, and Crystal had to sign off, so we are.
I'm sorry, I'm back though.
Oh, cool.
What was the question, Bobby?
The question is, what is the process involved for post-lockdown changes?
Yeah, there's a letter that the PM has to draft from our office head to Haral explaining why we are submitting the lockdown plans beyond the due date and requesting their acceptance.
Thank you, Crystal.
You're welcome.
All right. Next question, since hot button changes appear to happen on every project, should the expectations of environmental milestones be adjusted before the project starts? Instead of, oops, sorry. Sorry about that, my screen jumped. I'll start that over. Since hot button changes appear to happen on every project, should the expectations of environmental milestones be adjusted before the project starts? Instead of many projects getting delayed, should it be expected and built into the schedule from the start? In particular, changes at PFPR after technical studies are completed. Bobby, is that one you want to field or you want me to?
I would suggest if Albert's still in the chat box that he would be a great source, because we have not received support for altering schedules.
I was having trouble. Did you catch any of that, Chris, from Gail?
Yeah, I think Gail said that if Albert is still on the call, if he wants to reply to that question that's published in the chat, then that would be great. Okay. We have had, she said that we have had trouble with getting project schedules altered to take environmental resources into account. I think in general, the department is just trying to deliver projects as quickly as they possibly can, and they're looking for ways that tasks can be going on simultaneously. You know, a lot of our projects, you know, the project schedule is somewhere in the 3 to 5 year range, and that can be a long time to deliver these projects. And certainly it seems like something to look at if we're not delivering on a high percentage of our projects, where there might be some adjustments to that. And I know people are looking at that kind of stuff, and hopefully there is opportunities there for improvement.
Hi, this is Crystal.
Go ahead, Crystal.
Okay. I was just going to say that we do build in some float into the duration of the various activities, but it is a small amount of float. We don't build in a lot because we just don't know if a situation is going to occur, if a hot button issue is going to come up. Even though it seems like it happens on all projects, it doesn't. So to build it into every single project isn't feasible. Okay, thank you, Bobby.
Yeah, and I think those are all well said. The only thing I might add is, you know, that's why our metrics aren't 100%. You know, we just can't account for every situation that might come up that we're just not aware of. I think we do the best we can in scoping, you know, and identifying things early that could be potential issues down the road. But, you know, we just can't account for some situations that just arise. So I think that's why we build in, you know, 85 to 90% as the goal. And for those situations where we're just not going to meet baseline because of, you know, circumstances that are out of our control or we just weren't aware of, that we just have to, you know, adjust accordingly.
Well, and this is Gail. I would like to add one more thing about any rework, whether it be caused by a hot button change or something else. It's not simply a matter of the time, but it's being certain resources available to redo that work. And so while going back out and survey might only be a day or two, that individual has to be available to do that. And inevitably they're working on multiple projects, and so something else suffers if they have to drop what they're doing to redo work. Something else suffers.
Yeah, I think those are all good points too, and really highlights why we're having this discussion, providing this training, really understanding how we're all interconnected and the handoffs of what matters. You know, if we can get things on time, get started on time, reduce rework, we could be closer to those 85 or 95% goals.
Thank you, Patrick. Well said.
And we have one final question, which is a general question, and I think is something that really sums up the presentation nicely. What makeup of a project team have the presenters seen / experienced that foreshadows a successful delivery of a project, even when given an aggressive schedule? That's probably open to anybody who wants to jump in there.
That's a tough question. I mean, I think if we were able to dedicate resources to a project, I think part of our challenge is having limited resources spread over a lot of projects. But if we had just say a vital few, or in my experience, and back in my traffic ops days, and obviously smaller projects, but we had a dedicated team doing different roles, and we were laser focused on a project or a few projects, and we were able to get those turned around in pretty quick time frames.
And this is Crystal. I'll answer that question from the perspective of characteristics of team members. I think the characteristics of the team members should be those people who have good communication skills, who really value communication and can communicate at all levels, whether it be verbal or written. Any project team has to be made up of people who are good communicators. The team also has to be made up of those who are self-motivated. We all have a lot of projects on our plate. As you've seen on the P6 activities, each P6 schedule has like 75 to 100 activities. So we really can't have a lot of hand-holding. We need people who are self-motivated, who will stay on top of their particular activities, stay on top of the schedule, and make sure that they are being proactive and looking ahead as to what needs to be delivered and when. And then another characteristic is just being a good collaborator. It is a team. Everybody on the team has a different area of expertise. So just having that ability to collaborate, being open to new ideas, open to changes, because nothing stays the same. We're always facing changes. So those are, I think, are more important, are the characteristics of the team members.
This is Kay from OPMR. One thing I'll say, and I think I'll just maybe echo some of what Crystal said, is definitely some of the characteristics that I have seen is being able to ask questions and not being afraid to show some of the ideas that you don't really know. So definitely being able to ask questions. If there is a certain process that you're not really aware of, definitely ask for types of training. Something that I have seen come up a lot is some SMEs or just people in general on a project team will just kind of let a specific document lapse or a specific task lapse just because like it didn't fall into their hands, or they didn't feel like communicating because they did not want to step on any toes. Definitely making sure that you ask questions, even if you're asking the wrong questions. If something happens to move that project forward, you're still doing your part being on a team. So definitely communication plays a huge role in moving any project forward, as well as definitely asking for the right types of training so that you can get those tools that you need to get the job done.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kay.
Yeah, I'll chime in terms of having a plan. Really, there with schedules, there's always an ideal plan, which is what we put out. So the schedules that are developed are pretty much aggressive schedules. I always say that you've got to have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. And to, the other folks, what they said is communicating those plans. Surprises and changes are going to happen, but if you're prepared for them, you can take charge, show initiative, and help to lead the team beyond those anticipated changes. So always having a plan B, plan C is key as well.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. I think what I've seen on the environmental side of things is that, of course, it is really great if you walk into the room with your project team and everybody is sitting there with 20, 25 years of experience, and they know how to get a project through this complex schedule that we have and all these different moving parts. But the reality is that we have a lot of new people coming in all the time, which is really great for us. And so I think for me, it's also about looking at who your project team is and making sure that we're trying to help one another and playing for the long term, helping people develop and feel comfortable in these and gain confidence in these roles so that they can have future success on these projects. Other than that, I think it's one, knowing what the project schedule is and making sure on the consultant side that you're touching base with GDOT and making sure if there's an associated SME that y'all are on the same page, you know, when you need to have things in by to accomplish that project schedule. That when you identify problems or issues that may jeopardize the project schedule, that it's something that you're bringing to the attention of the project team right away, talking to the PM and making sure y'all have a group conversation about what a recovery schedule might look like. So yeah, I mean, what Crystal said, I think is so important, just about the communication aspect of things. And for me, just like the mutual respect among all the people who are trying to deliver these complex projects. We did have one last question come in, which is maybe just a comment and just something for us to think about. There seems to be little to no flexibility in adjusting the project schedules, but it doesn't seem to be a problem with putting a project on the shelf. I don't know if that's anything that anybody here wants to address quickly. We need to probably move on, but if there's a quick answer to that, love to hear it.
Well, this is Crystal. I don't know if that was really a question, but I will say that putting a project on the shelf has more to do with funding. The only reason why we put projects on the shelf is because we don't have the funding for the next phase, whether that be right-of-way acquisition or construction. A lot of times we don't want to, if we don't have to, we don't want to change the schedule, even though the project is going to the shelf. We want to keep the baseline, keep it moving forward, because we never know if the money will become available, and we don't need to put it on the shelf. As long as we get it ready per the baseline, then we could potentially start the right-of-way acquisition, or we could let it. So that's why we generally don't change the baseline schedule, just because we know a project is slated for the shelf.
And I'll chime in just to say on shifting schedules. I mean, we've got policy and guidelines, so it must meet those criteria for us to shift it. The last thing we want to do is continue to push and change schedules on every 6 months or every year. And at that point, the schedule becomes pointless to have a baseline schedule. You're not chasing the target. Basically, you're just updating your baseline dates to meet a metric at that point. So the schedule's there for a very good reason, and it provides history in terms of how we've performed on as well. But if it meets the criteria for updating the project schedule baseline, then it's a tool that we will embrace and update.
Thank you very much. And that brings us close to our questions and to our closing remarks. So I'll pass that over to Amber Maddox.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Amber Maddox. I'm the Environmental Delivery Support Team Manager, and I will just be taking a quick moment to wrap everything up for this afternoon. So just a few quick takeaways from today. First, everyone who's working on the project should be familiar with project schedule and any deliverable dates. And also, you'll want to be aware of the time that's needed to complete certain activities. And with that knowledge, that should help with understanding the consequences of a task that could potentially start or end late. Okay. Also, we want to keep in mind strategies to remain on schedule throughout the project. With that in mind, the goal is to work to remain on schedule. So we'll just run through a quick reminder of strategies to remain on schedule. One, NTP to primes, that is the responsibility of the department to have that in a timely manner. If you're a prime using subs, you'll want to have the NTP to any subs in a timely manner as well. Oh, did I go too fast? Sorry, I think I skipped this line here. Ooh. Did I skip over one? I'm going to try to go back here. There was one last slide. It was just a few final things to note. If you're an anonymous attendee, you won't actually be notified when this session, when the recording is posted or when the question and answer document is compiled and posted as well. So just an FYI on that. And last, we would like to give a huge thank you to GDOT's AV team, to Brian Stokes for producing, also to David Jones and to Markel Elder for all of your guidance and tech support. And thank you to all of the participants. That includes attendees as well as presenters alike. And we thank you all for joining us. And I would like for you to enjoy the rest of your day.